Okay, let's go to Saturday. These are the series that are established, and we have a quadruple header already locked in on Saturday. Then we obviously have 2 locked in so far on Sunday. But let's do these chronologically, beginning with, and we'll do it either, we'll do game 1 thoughts and then series thoughts. Starts out with the 6-3 game 1 between the Nets and the Sixers, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. Obviously, the 76ers, huge favorites in this series at -900. The Nets, 6-1. You can play it any which way. Obviously, the game 1 spread, the great equalizer. What do we get? 8.5 in favor of the Sixers here, I'm seeing.
Yep.
Any thoughts?
Yep. From a game perspective, at least for game 1, not necessarily, and it is vastly different from when we saw these two teams play. We'll go back to February 11th, right? Because the Nets had been newly constructed. You didn't really know what was going on with their roster. Philadelphia was in a tough stretch of their schedule. But the Philadelphia 76ers in that game closed as 2-point road favorites in Brooklyn. So that would translate to right about where we're at right now. So we're not seeing a really big adjustment. I think from a game-to-game standpoint, Gill, I think I'm attacking this from a player prop standpoint. What I'm really interested in is if you go back and watch that game between these two, there's nobody really to guard Joel Embiid, right? Nick Claxton's fine, but he gives up 65 pounds. He's very slight. So what the Nets did in that game was they just sent double after double against Joel Embiid. And I think it leads to 2 things. I think it leads to 1, assists for Joel Embiid. So looking to him go over his assist prop would be something I think that's worth monitoring on a game-to-game basis. But also, he still got to the free throw line quite a bit, fighting through some of those double teams. In that game, he had 13 free throw attempts. So playing something in terms of Joel Embiid's free throws would, I think, work in that realm too. I don't see a very big value in terms of the number here on the game. I'm just kind of looking to find player props and coming out of that from Joel Embiid and how they're going to handle him as opposed to bet this series game to game.
Best guess, you think this is a 5-game series, a gentleman's sweep?
Yeah, so in the write up for the series, I put I thought the way to play it was total games under 5.5, right? Because you can get in that range of like 5 or 4 if they end up sweeping them. I think you want to give yourself some wiggle room because one of the things that Brooklyn is kind of dangerous with, they do take well over 40% of their attempts from 3-point range with this new roster. And so if you get any single night where those guys are just bombing away, because they do have some shooters on that roster and they shoot at a high volume, there could be a night in which they just shoot their way to a victory if they get really hot. So I think you want to leave yourself some wiggle room there. But Philadelphia should be able to take care of the series with ease, and they should want to take care of the series with ease. James Harden's been dealing with a sore Achilles. They want to get this thing done and get it done quick so they get him some rest before they take on, assuming it's Boston in the next round.
Good call. Well, go ahead, Kelley.
3.5 for that assist prop for Joel Embiid over +110 over at DraftKings if you want to consider. And yeah, I think this one's got gentleman's sweep written all over.
-160 on the under 5.5 games. Always shop around. Real quick, let's squeeze this one in. Following that one is the 7-2. Game 1 in the Eastern Conference, the aforementioned Celtics against the Hawks. Celtics 9.5-point favorites in Game 1. They're also a big series favorite, but you use the word gnat to describe the Thunder in a potential Thunder Nuggets series. Could the Hawks be that against the Celtics?
Kelley knows where I'm going with this. I think they can be, man. We saw, I think, a couple of things against Miami, right? We finally saw the version of Atlanta that we've expected for quite a while now, which is a team that has a lot of talent, high-end offense, can rebound very well, is pretty switchable, and can guard multiple positions with the wings that they have. So I think there's things to like about Atlanta. And the one thing that I brought up to Kelley, Gill, which I really liked a lot, is you saw little fingerprints of Quinn Snyder on this team. Like they're running double slip screens for Trae Young so he can get free. One of the things he could not do against Miami, yet here he is finding the mid-range area, using his floater, actually having things open up for him because the offense was running stuff that actually got him to his spots. I think that they're going to be quite the pest. And I'll put it this way. I actually think that the probability of Atlanta beating Boston is a little bit higher than the probability of Brooklyn beating Philadelphia, and yet you have a higher price here for the Boston Celtics in this series. So I think there are different ways to attack this, but I think they can be that gnat. And on a game-to-game basis, where Boston is heavily reliant on their three-point shooting, if they go cold, we've seen how disjointed their offense can be. Since the start of the All-Star break, I think they're 22nd in net rating in non-garbage time, in clutch time. I think the Hawks can be pretty annoying in this series.
More likely that they could take 2, let's say, over the Celtics than the aforementioned Nets can take that 2 games over the Sixers. JVT, kind enough to hang out with us for another segment because it's a great time of year. The NBA playoffs set to go in earnest this weekend. These play-ins are not quite in earnest, if you know what I mean. Let's continue. On Saturday, we went through the first couple games. It's also an Eastern Conference game, so the Eastern Conference goes 1, 2, 3 out of the gates on Saturday. This is the one, JVT, that's already was established the longest. The Cavs and the Knicks, the 4-5. you've given your thoughts on this before on the show, but why don't you repeat them for folks if you would?
Yeah, and obviously it really depends on whether or not Julius Randle is going to be available at the start of this series between these two. But if we're assuming that he's going to be available, Gill, I am somewhat surprised that the market is and some media members are just chalking this up for a Cavaliers victory. When you look at some of the things that the Knicks can do here against the Cleveland Cavaliers, they can do quite a bit. If you look at just their depth overall, when you're talking about the New York Knicks boasting six different players who average at least 10.1 points per game, 3 of them average more than 19.5 points per game. That's, of course, R.J. Barrett, Julius Randle, and Jalen Brunson. And you get 2 guys off the bench, Emmanuel Quickley and Josh Hart. They're a very deep team. They could take advantage of a Cavs bench in which they outscored them in all 4 games by an average margin of 9 points per game. If you look at the way that just these matchups work, right? If you go back to when they played in New York, for example, Julius Randle had a massive game in that first half. And so what the Cavs did in that second half was, okay, well, we're going to put Jarrett Allen on you, and we're going to put Evan Mobley on your center because it's Jericho Sims. Well, that works when Jericho Sims is playing. Mitchell Robinson's playing now. So now all of a sudden you've got to switch up your matchups, and you go, okay, well, we can't put Jarrett Allen on Julius Randle because then, of course, Mitchell Robinson's going to destroy Evan Mobley on the offensive glass. There are a lot of things that I think make the Knicks pretty competitive in this series. You have to be able to stop Donovan Mitchell, and that's probably not going to happen. We can also go after Donovan Mitchell defensively. So I think the way that you want to do this, and again, it is all relying on whether Julius Randle is going to be available. If you want to look at plus 1.5 games in the series at about a minus 130 price for the New York Knicks, or playing this in a way that tells you that the Knicks are going to be competitive if Randle's going to be available, I think that's the way to go. I get that we kind of want to throw out the regular season to a certain extent, but when a vast majority of the players that were going to participate in this series were available in the regular season and you got to watch those matchups and study them, I'm surprised that this is kind of being chalked up to, all right, can't wait to see Cavs take on the Bucks in the second round, because I just don't know if it's going to be that easy for Cleveland.
Cleveland minus 200 on the series line, Knicks plus 165. Knicks saying they'll only play Randle in game 1 if he's 100%, however you want to define that. Okay, now it gets good. Final game of the quadruple header on Saturday. We go to the Western Conference. It is the much-anticipated 3-6, 90 minutes apart. Sacramento Kings and the Golden State Warriors. Now, this is one of these series, Kelley. This will make people's heads explode. But Sacramento is going to, if you take the game 1 line, right, which is Sacramento minus a 1.5, Sacramento theoretically, let's just say things remain static, which they never do, but let's say theoretically would be a favorite in 4 games and an underdog in 3, yet the Warriors are minus 275 series price favorites. And the reason for that is because the Warriors will be much bigger favorites in the 3 games at home. So, all that said, what do you like in game 1? What do you think about this series price, which I know, JVT, we all did the guess beforehand. This is much higher than you thought it would be.
Yes, it is. And we're starting to see some pushback in the market, right? Like some spots were as high as $3. I'm seeing consensus minus 275. So there's been a little bit of buyback here on Sacramento. I think for game 1, look, I think there's 2 ways you can make the argument for Sacramento for and against them, right? The 4 would be, hey, man, beam team, haven't played a playoff game in 16 years, charged environment, bad road team. This team's going to come out, be, really ratcheted up, ready to go, and they're going to come out there and get a big win in game 1. You'd also make the argument that that team is going to be tight as hell because it's the first game in 16 years on their own home court, and they want to make sure that they get a victory in front of their home crowd. But I think ultimately it just comes down to this for me, and why I would very much look at Sacramento in game 1 and betting them in this series. I think the probability is a little too high for the Golden State Warriors, which is just that are we just sure that Golden State's just going to fix their defense when they were playing away from home? They were the third worst road defense in the NBA, Gill. It's not that they went on the road and saw a bunch of bright lights and loud fans who were like, I'm nervous. Let's not win these games. No, there were tangible issues with the Golden State Warriors when they went on the road and lost 30 of those road games. Are they going to be better? Probably. Is Klay Thompson, who, when you go back and watch these regular season matchups, Klay Thompson was getting beat off the dribble by multiple guys. There was a lot of things that went wrong for the Warriors because of individual efforts. Their bench units are not good defensively. Steve Kerr had to play zone when he had Jordan Poole and Dante DiVincenzo and Steph Curry out there on the floor because they're just not good on-ball defenders. And you have a lot of good guard play here for Sacramento. I think there are actual matchups that work for the Sacramento Kings against the Golden State Warriors. So again, approaching it from that perspective, looking at the Kings in game 1 and for the series, I think is the way to go here. Will the Warriors ultimately win? Sure, if you're going to tell me that that's going to happen, I would believe it. But I really quibble with the degree to which the market has this Warriors team favored. I think it completely ignores some of the strengths that the Kings do have that can work for them in this series.
I say this, pardon me, I say this as a Warriors guy and a guy who has a Warriors ticket to win the Western Conference. If the Warriors win Game 1, how ridiculous will the pivot be from everybody in mainstream media from, oh, they're going to just roll them now, right? Which I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm just saying, wow, will that narrative change?
Oh, 100%. And look, I'm in your camp too. I've got them at 9-1 to win the West. So like I hope that they can pull this off and move on because I've got a nice ticket on them. And I think you're right. Like the narrative is going to change. I just you know me, Gill, we talk about numbers and data all the time. I find it hard to ignore 41 games worth of a sample size that tell us they've got some issues in these settings. We can kind of pin your finger on what it is, and to just say, reading a lot of analysis, a lot of it ends with it's the Warriors. And like at some point the Warriors do have some issues,
Yeah. Well, those four championships will make you do that though, yeah.
See, a couple shops have already moved to Warriors -1 in Game 1.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we know 2 of the series, then they're locked in on Sunday. They will be, in terms of the chronology of the quadruple head, it'll be games 2 and 4 as the day lays out. But the second of the 2 games on Sunday will be the 2-7 series in the West between the Lakers and the Memphis Grizzlies, where the Grizzlies are only, I'll put in quotes, -140 series favorites. Why? Because it's the Lakers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it is the Lakers, but I also think we have to realize that it's the matchup too and the injuries, right? Brandon Clark and Steven Adams are not going to play in this series. As we know, they're done for the rest of the year. And that's really, really big because now the onus is on Jaren Jackson Jr. to stay on the floor and defend at a high level. And we know he can do one of those things. But Gill, he averaged 3.4 personal fouls per game this season against the Lakers, and he played in every single game. He averaged 5. He had really a lot of trouble staying on the floor. And if he doesn't, well, now all of a sudden your front court rotations turn to 6'8", 225 Xavier Tillman, Santi Aldama, who I think is like 6'10" and 98 pounds, David Roddy. Like it really throws your front court into flux if Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to continue to have these foul issues. And by the way, they're probably going to continue. The Lakers were the 3rd best free throw rate team on offense in the entire NBA. They did that against the Minnesota Timberwolves in that 4th quarter, and I think that's why you're seeing this short price. It obviously part of it is the name on the front, right? The uniforms do garner a little bit more in terms of where you're going to skew the probability of winning a series. But I think this matchup really does work for the Los Angeles Lakers, and they also can defend at a high level. Don't forget that the Grizzlies come into this, if you're talking about the 6 teams respectively that made it into the top 6, right, of their respective conferences, the Grizzlies have the worst half-court offense amongst all of them. And that includes when Ja Morant's on the floor. I think there's just quite a bit here that work for the Lakers. Now, obviously, there's strengths that work for the Grizzlies. They're good defensively. Lakers' offense has been inconsistent. They don't shoot very well either, so that's something that could work for them. But I just think at the end of the day, when you're talking about, the high price was plus 130 over at Circa, which I bet for the Los Angeles Lakers to win this series. I think that's worth grabbing. It's not just because it's the Lakers, but I think the market's not really accounting for how bad these injuries are for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, no, point well taken on the matchups for sure. And then there's this with a minute left here because I know you love the Clippers. The 5-4. Yes. Clippers, try as they might have, could not avoid the Suns in the 5-4. Suns are $6 favorites in this series. I know you object to that, don't you?
Yeah, and we're starting to see that come down now. Like the DraftKings, which opened above $6, is now down to minus 500. So there's some pushback here, and there should be. That's a really strong number for a team that has played 8 games with their superstar, 574 total possessions against teams that were either eliminated, didn't play their starters, or were playing teams. It's a really big number. And I'll just say this really quickly, Gill. The Clippers are starting to figure things out. Russell Westbrook and Kawhi Leonard, without Marcus Morris, who's not part of the starting rotation, have a really good starting net rating together. Without anybody on the floor in terms of their starters, and Terrence Mann out there now running the bench units, that's got a plus 5.7 net rating. Like, these are teams this team is starting to figure some stuff out. And again, just the probability of them winning this series is higher. I put a small bet on them at 4-1 to win the series, but the bigger bet, I think, is to look at them plus 2.5 games at like minus 120, minus 125. That's a really cheap number for that, I think.
So big shout out to the Clippers plus 2.5 games of that series, but he did pull the trigger on the 4-1. That's what I wanted to know. He put his money where his mouth was. Thank you, JVT. This is going to be fun, man. Can't wait. Appreciate it.
Always good to talk to you guys. Thanks.
You too. Jonathan Von Tobel, Hardwood Handicappers, the podcast, available at VSiN.com/podcast. And, of course, follow him on Twitter at MeJVT, our senior NBA analyst.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.